You are listening to the C-Realm podcast. I am your host, KMO, and I'm joined once again by a C-Realm favorite, a repeat guest on the podcast, Neil Kramer. Neil, welcome back to the C-Realm podcast.
Well, hello, KMO. It's excellent to be here once more.
Neil, I have had a request from a listener to take a breather from the gloom and doom of the C-Realm podcast and focus on the positive, focus on what people can do not to prepare for catastrophe, but just to sort of embrace life and discover what their purpose is and really engage with it. I think that's what people need to do, and it can be done, as I've said many times, cheaply. So the fact that we might be coming to a period where materially things seem quite thin, stretched, taut, we have lots of opportunity to really live better, more engaging, more satisfying lives. And I think you are an excellent person to speak to that subject.
Well, yes, hopefully I can inject a bit of empowerment into things. That's usually what I sort of seek to do. So I do like to frame things in the sense that I do believe in the human endeavour, and I do think it's a worthwhile activity. And largely on my travels and on my own thoughts and my own interactions and so on, by and large, most people are good, and most people want the same kind of things, and most people feel the same kind of reactions and difficulties about what's going on in the world. And I think that there's something important in that. And a key theme that's recurrent in my work is really this idea of dissonance, both cognitive and emotional, philosophical, energetic, whatever. And that really, I think, is something that has become, a little bit more prescient, a little bit more pressing as well, in terms of what a few years ago was quite abstract and quite just theorised about, really, by listeners and forum members and podcasters and writers and so on, is really kind of sliding into the mainstream now. And I think that dissonance is felt by not only informed observers, but also just really casual observers and, quite frankly, uninformed observers as well. So anybody who looks at what's going on in the news and the newspapers and the internet and so on, with governments and the Middle East and the wars and the finance, state of the economy, etc., it is very negative looking. And people are just scratching their heads. And I think really it stems from, we have an idea, this is where dissonance comes from, we have an idea, a perceptual framework, a belief that we live in a freely elected democratic nation. And, the people who administrate our democracies, the governments and the think tanks and institutions and so on, are there to fairly and properly represent the people, us, the civilian population. And unfortunately, that simply isn't true. And no matter how you look at it, and how deeply and how analytically you scratch away at this thing and chip away into the substance of it, that is the case, that actually isn't true. We don't live in that kind of world. And in my view, we never have done. And so for me, to break through the polarity of seeing things as good or bad, or ideologically, optimistically, unrealistic, or doomily, gloomily, let's all cull the whole population and give the earth a breather, I don't think any of those two are particularly credible or viable or very sensible thoughts, actually. And for me, the whole thing begins with a realization. And we have to see something as it is, not as a belief and not as a thought or an idea, but as it is. And so because of the dissonance that we perceive when we look at things through this group lens, this group reality tunnel, it is kind of natural to aim our indignation, if you like, or to diffuse our dissonance by criticising the current bunch of administrators. So right now, of course, Obama, Cameron, Merkel, Sarkozy, Netanyahu, whoever, the figureheads of these of these systems of governance. And it's easy to do that because they're always rubbish, essentially. And slightly older people, typically, the generation and a half or up, they will think, well, it's very tempting to think it was much better in the days of Thatcher and Reagan, if you're a conservative, or Blair and Bush, although that might be a bit of a stretch in anybody's book, actually. But, depending on your age, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Churchill, Macmillan, Harold Wilson, all these figures from the 50s and 60s and 70s and so on, that things were better then and things were different then. And in my view, that what you're seeing there really is a sort of paucity, a real lack of abundance of knowledge and of information. And the dream was much more saturated then in the 50s. And so things did seem a lot better, but in actual fact, they're exactly the same as they are now, in my view, at a conscious level and at a political level. And there was still the same shenanigans and still the same insidious behaviour that there is today. It's just that there was no mass media and there was no instant communication, so it was much, much easier to cover up. So anyway, the realisation is a simple one, that what we dwell within is a system of governance based on resource management. That's what it's about. And we're part of that resource, but it's also abstract resources like money and futures trading and systems of economic statistical charting that bear very little resemblance to reality whatsoever, and also minerals and obviously oils and fossils and all the rest of it. And really, whether you want to look at this from a geopolitical perspective or realpolitik or esoteric perspective, New World Order, conspiratorial, or whether you want to zoom out a little bit and see this as consciousness and a spiritual journey, all these things are valid, credible avenues of inquiry. They all show us things that are significant. They're all important to contemplate it. And it's no use just focusing on just one, because you only see one facet of this object. So the realization, this truth, brings us back onto the focus of us, ourselves, as individuals, not even as a group, but as you, the listener, as you, the thinker, as the experiencer. And what does this mean, this perception, this realization in your day-to-day life? So it brings it back into very much your own consciousness. And that means that if the source of your incoming vectors, shall we say, where you get your news from, is just the TV, BBC and CNN and so on, Fox or whatever, and the radio and the newspapers and Google News and so on, is that really giving you a valid picture of what's occurring in the 21st century on Earth? And I think we all know that it isn't really a valid picture. It's one single filter through which we see things, one single translation of what's going on in the world. So the first thing to deal with, to grasp this realization, is in this sort of impulse of understanding what's happening in your community, what's happening in science, in music, in art, technology, spirituality. What are people doing who have long since anticipated or experienced this realization and who have already gone through it? What are those people doing? So the realization really boils down to a simple truth, which is the world really isn't the way we were told it was. And now that is very, very self-evident, and there's no real escape from that. And the problem looks very doom-laden when we imagine that the only way to solve that problem is by shuffling around the same pieces on the game board that represent that problem. And of course, that isn't really a viable way forward. And various people have worded this in different ways, that you can't kind of solve the problem with the same consciousness or the same mindset that created the problem. So always with these things, it brings us back to what are we going to do in our own lives, because that's where the whole thing for me emanates from. And many spiritual philosophical systems and traditions and sects and so on have grappled with these questions for aeons, for many, many millennia. It's nothing new, this. It's always been like this. And it's not suddenly got a lot worse. It's just suddenly got a lot clearer. So the problem now is a big high definition issue right in front of your eyes. It's not a rumour, it's not a notion, and it's not a vague or faint possibility. It's something that is right there, we can see it. It doesn't function, the system is broken. And so even within the main monotheistic religions, the Abrahamic religions, Christianity, Islam, Judaism, whatever, for me, the root of all these systems is a single spiritual discipline, which is aimed at the same things, which is liberation, clarity, cooperation, harmony, knowingness, and fundamentally understanding that the idea that when we rewire our inner landscape, that is the only thing that shifts the outer landscape. And I think if that is consigned to, well, that's all very nice, that's a bit of New Age philosophy or a bit of old stuff wrapped up in some, new paper or whatever, we can't do that anymore, because that is where the solution lies. So that dissonance that I speak of, that arises from the fact that we constantly seek to disavow this truth, this discipline of the inner landscape of what we are and what we're doing here. And the longer we disavow that, the worse things get on the outside. So in a very, very literal sense, and I must admit even myself over the last decade or whatever, it's increasingly got this way for me, the outside is a very literal translation of what's going on the inside. Not only it cause and effects kind of way of, well, we think these things and then we do these things, but the actual mental landscape inside, if that is toxic, then the outside is instantly always also toxic. And so we have to go to that inner space to correct this problem. And that is where this solution and this issue lies for me. And so I remain extremely optimistic, because our facility for transforming that inner landscape in a very real, hands-on, simple way, and all the different techniques and tools and tactics and strategies and so on, are very well documented, very well laid out, and despite various attempts to subvert those, the accessibility of that information and hide it and conceal it, hasn't worked. It's all still there, it's all over the place, and it can be gotten to. But we're so accustomed to living a life which is very self-centered in the commonly understood sense, and very clinging to our own existence, that it seems an equation that doesn't add up for a lot of people. Like, what's in it for me if I go within? What does that mean? What you're talking about? How does that change the outside? So we do find ourselves at a stage where we've all been in this university, this college, whatever, for a long, long time, and not many people are anywhere near graduating. They're all still pissing around in the first few classes, in the first couple of years, and they don't understand that the progress, the growth, the ascendance through that school is what it's all about. And so that, in my view, also accounts at a higher level for why there's 7 billion people here, because nobody's really graduating. Everybody keeps arriving, but few people feel equipped. And I stress feel equipped, not that they're not equipped. They don't feel equipped to deal with this inner reality. And the sense that the two things are separate, the inside and the outside, is the fundamental problem. So unless you understand the bridge between the two, then it is an insurmountable issue, and you might as well just vaporize the whole place, Vogon style, and just start again. But that is just a reboot. It doesn't actually correct the fundamental issue, and it will just recur again in a few million or billion years or whatever. So we might as well deal with it now. We might as well grasp the nettle now.
Fascination with freedom in your hands. Now you call me, you call me, you call me, you call me. This introduction to the peacefulness of your stance. And now you call me. Call me, you call me, you call me home. No one could be true away. Like beats on the wind, like spider webs breaking at the hand of innocence. Fascination with the ethers, how they collide. But now they're shaking, they're shaking, they're shaking, they're shaking. I can't be torn between darkness and light. 'Cause I'm breaking. I'm breaking, I'm breaking, I'm breaking too. No one could be strewn away like beads on the wind, like spider webs breaking at the hand of innocence.
listening to the Sea Realm podcast. Turn on, tune in, and take heart.
Neil, you mentioned briefly the leaders of various countries, And there does seem to be a lot of churn, a lot of relationships, a lot of power structures which had seemed really stable for a very long time are suddenly shaking to pieces, and we have not seen the new order arise yet. It's all we're seeing right now is just the broken pieces of the order, which obviously is no more. And I wonder if that, if what we're seeing in the Middle East and just the way that this whole story is being told to the population at large is indicative of anything that you have been talking about for a long time now.
I think it is important that always preceding a new way of doing things is a destruction of the old way of doing things. And I don't think that's anything to be afraid of. It isn't the case that you can move from one moving train that is going north and just jump across from the tram, what do you call them here, the cars, to the other train that's moving south without actually getting off. So you have to get off and stand there in the wilderness, scratching your head, looking at both trains disappearing. It's not possible to smoothly step from one system into another. There's always a point where we had a certain, let's say, equilibrium for a long time. And as somebody recently said to me, there is this thing in physics, in particle physics, of disequilibration, where a system, before it coalesces into something new, has to lose its equilibrium. And that is what we're seeing now. And to some extent, I agree with previous writers and commentators and thinkers on this, that it's not a bad thing that this happens. And it's also not something that is entirely within the control of the powers that be, the elites that shuffle the cards around. They're in a state of anxiety that is not far away from everyone else's. So it's not something that they are in total control of. So conspiracy people can kind of take the foot off the accelerator a bit, because it's not quite like that. It doesn't quite work like that. Things are fundamentally weird, and nobody really gets to pull the levers on every single thing that goes on. You can just steer things a little bit, surf left or right a little bit, and that's about it. So this disequilibration, to me, is a sign that the consciousness is changing, and where there was extraordinary deceits before that went completely unchecked, that's becoming less possible now in governmental circles and in elite circles. It's not so easy to do that anymore. So there is a fundamental shift in the power structures from localized pockets and states and counties and organizations and so on to hugely centralized edifices. And that's where a lot of the comment about this extraordinary division of the earth into just a few small sectors, like this huge European superstate, and the disintegration of the US dollar, which seems to be almost upon us, or if not has already happened, and there's just this surrogate just tiding us over till this this American Mexican currency comes in. All these ideas and things being put into place, contingency plans, they are contingencies for trying to accommodate this change. And for me, the best way to anticipate change, as I said recently in an essay on the website, is to actually be that change and to be part of that change, not as directed by somebody like Obama or somebody even like Gandhi, from where he steals half his stuff, I gather, but more in the sense that if you can change what you do yourself on a day-to-day basis and where your resources come from, and again, not just your material resources, but your social and emotional resources, and where does your inspiration come from? Where does your fulfillment come from? How much joy is there? Where do those things come from? How are you creating them? Or are you just expecting to consume them from elsewhere? So the idea of consumption being slowly diminished is a key resonator for me in these times, because people are not consuming in the way that they used to do. Despite any statistics and any polls that come out, If you walk around a large British or American shopping mall 20 years ago, and then fast forward 10 years and look at it, and then fast forward to today and look at it, it's very, very different inside who's actually in there now, and the demographic of people who are in there now, and who is considering consumption at that material level as a leisure activity that is satisfying. That's very different now. So even in the mainstream, even at a basic common level, if I can put it that way, just in neutral terms, people are beginning to understand that there's some sort of obligation, if you're going to do something about making things better, to actually create that for yourself. Not only in what you choose to buy and what you don't choose to buy, and kind of punishing Walmart when they do something naughty, or punishing McDonald's when they do something unpleasant, but actually totally reconsidering that, the whole way that that happens, in terms of not only what you buy for the resources that you put in your mouth, but also for the things that cultivate your mind. So the drop-off of watching cinema releases and believing popular music to be any sort of representative slice of what people want to hear is not purely due to digital revolutions and stuff. It's because people know it's fundamentally low quality, it's low fidelity, it doesn't actually give you anything. It's an expression of something that is really quite dehumanizing. And so there's a shift in that. This state of disintegration, which is quite a natural thing, it's quite an organic thing, which precedes a new way of doing things. And what people aren't sure about is, well, I know I don't want to do this anymore, but I hand on heart, I'm not entirely sure what I do want to do. It's a very difficult thing to say that. Easy to say what you don't want. Quite tricky, quite slippery to lay your hands upon what you do want to do. And that's for anyone, myself included, everybody I know, it's always the same. It's quite tricky to do that. Even if you win the state lottery and millions of dollars land in your hand, you're still in the position where, well, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Are you just going to luxuriate in material sensations, or what are you going to do with that? How are you going to shift your growth in that respect? How is that going to change? Are you going to hide away? Are you going to try and escape? Or are you going to do something? So it brings us back always, this thinking, to the idea, which is crucial in understanding this. We talked about a realization earlier, and we talk about something else that's allied to that closely now, which is what I call the construct. And the construct really is a map that is given to us, given to everybody when they first arrive, when they first show up on Earth. And unlike a normal two-dimensional map, which just shows us pictures of where things are and how we get to them and so on, the construct is a deeply immersive, three-dimensional virtual reality that kind of plugs straight into your senses, really. And it tells us what things are and how they work and how we interact with them and what they mean. And babies and adults repeatedly are told what a thing is until they no longer question what they've been told. This is this, it's not something else, this is this. And all the politicians and movie stars and corporate execs and students and mothers and fathers, they all agree on these things, what they are. All of them consent to this construct version of reality. And this is the way it is. It's not some other way. This is the way it is. And everybody follows suit. We all follow suit. And it's in this continual observance of the construct and its routines and traditions and customs that gives it its solidity. And repetition is a very, very important part of that. And so it's only by beginning to move away from that construct and actually reimagining what things are that you figure out something quite astonishing, which is we're actually full of ideas and creative ideas of what the alternatives look like. But you can't do that from within the construct. And I have this little phrase, you cannot change the dream from within the dream. You have to step outside of it to see it. And so it is that persuasive, compelling nature of the construct that stems from everybody's agreement with it, that it's the norm, it's the way things are, it's the real world. And it is, one could say, that normality is the religion of the construct. So to move away from that is to risk being shunned, is to risk being a loony, or to be strange, or to be a cultist or something like that, or a new ager or whatever. And that is the thing that has to be overcome, that fundamentally what we see as normal is actually not normal. It's abnormal. And the way we've been doing things for many, many thousands of years is not normal. It's not the way people want to live, and it's not the way people want to behave. And it's this flipping that over on its head to make those apparently negative things positive. That's what gives the construct its hive mentality. And this is precisely what it relies upon for its kind of structural integrity. And it's only where a certain threshold of people, a certain frequency of consciousness, when they start to lose faith in the construct, it begins to falter, it begins to lose its equilibrium, disequilibrate, that word again. And that's what we see happening now. People are losing the faith in what it is. So what the construct tries to do is immediately offer an alternative, because it knows that most people don't realize that they can do that themselves, that you don't need anyone else to do it for you. You can do it yourself. But the construct is clever, and it knows that people don't realize that, because we've been taught to believe that really we're just biological machines and we don't really generate anything. We just try and make the best of what we've got. So it doesn't work like that. It really does not work like that. So we have to say a very simple thing. We have to understand something here. Why question what is commonly considered to be the best map of reality, the construct? Why walk away from that when that has represented the sort of received wisdom of thousands of years of human history? Why would we walk away from that? And for me, there's 3 points there, 3 answers. The first one, on a collective level, the historical story of human beings on this planet has not been a very sane narrative, and it's full of pain and hardship. And those things have become so common, so commonplace, that we're tempted to think that that's just the way it is. That's the way things are with human beings. The second point is this: on an individual level, we are compelled to realize that the construct is not our personal map, it's someone else's. So the way we see reality through this group tunnel is not ours, it's someone else's. So it may not, therefore, be best suited to our own individual journey. Okay? And the third point, on a metaphysical level, and this is really important, I want to be very clear about this, with a bit of contemplation and a bit of stillness in seeing this, it is very clear that we have habitually come to confuse our description of reality, the construct, with reality itself. As has been pointed out many times by many people throughout the years, the map is not the terrain. And so the Hindu spiritual sages obviously referred to the fake map as Maya, a beguiling concealment, they called it. And that is very much what the construct is, but it's become less organic even as that concealment. It's very synthetic now. So, of course, we can debate these points, and we can offer counter-arguments and various persuasive little deliberations and so on. But at the inner level, when we're completely authentic with ourselves, we all know full well that the human story has gone off track a little bit. And the system under which we operate does not serve us very well, and it never has done. And so it is time to do things differently, and that begins with moving away from the construct. And the way I describe that is, very simply, we've not obviously got time to go into the ins and outs of this, but if you think of it like this, okay, a bank robber who wants to rob the bank, the first thing he has to do is bypass the security system. And the key to doing that, to penetrating that security system, is in understanding who created the system, how it was created, and what actually is it designed to protect. Okay? And so the construct has to be viewed in that sense. who created it, how, and what is the construct designed to protect? Because there's an organic element to it, which is part of the mystery of being on Earth, to perceive that. But there is a definite synthetic element to it as well. And it's that synthetic element that deserves our analysis. And very often we can say that the left brain impulse in humans to label and categorize and file and turn everything into this huge taxonomy, this hierarchical system of classification, doesn't really help us hugely in that respect. And so we have to exercise the right brain impulse a little more, the intuitive impulse, the creative impulse. And I understand from sort of neuroscience and stuff, it isn't actually quite as black and white as that with the two hemispheres. It's not quite as simple as that. So I'm just using this as a very rough measure of describing things. But the basic deal is, if you accept the taxonomy, the structure, the hierarchy of the construct, and you agree with that, then it appears that you get a lot of freedom within it, because you can choose from this sort of vast shopping list of things. Name what you want and it's all there. You can drive what you want, live where you want, drink and eat what you want, play sport, vote, have sex, join the army, join the Masons, whatever you want to do. You can do anything, whatever. And that's the genius of the construct. And it feels like freedom when you can select from its shopping list, but it is not freedom. So that overwhelming degree of choice really deters people from any further contemplation of what real liberation is, what real freedom is. And so it's only by moving away from that construct that we begin to understand that we do have our own choices. And you only know that when you begin to do it. And the easiest way to do it, to begin that inching away from it, because it's not wise to entirely jump out of it if you've spent your whole life there, because it's too much of a shock. It's like jumping into a freezing cold ocean. It's just a massive shock to the system, and the impulse is just to jump right back out again. So you have to do it little by little. It's a prudent way of approaching it. And the way to do that is number one, is to move away from its media, is to move away from its broadcasts, because they do not represent actual reality in any way, shape or form. And the filters of those broadcasts are so at odds with what's actually happening in the world that it really kind of deters us from seeing clearly from our own filters, from our own way of looking at things. And it creates a sort of noise. So we have to decontaminate ourselves from the mainstream media. And that's a very powerful way of doing that. Not just don't watch TV, the whole thing, everything. So to move away from that noise creates space for us to receive the real signal of reality. The only signal is the organic signal, and that does not come through the media, okay? So it's not possible to perceive clearly when you're continually force-feeding yourself with news and violence and sport and celebrity and those deceits. You have to detach from it. And a very wonderful thing happens, which is that your view of reality begins to shift to a real one. So you still see the black and white and the grey, you still see the positives and you still see the negatives. You don't detach yourself by hiding, you detach yourself by reformulating your own perceptive apparatus to say, I am going to see things as they are. I'm still going to walk through New York City, I'm still going to walk through London, I'm still going to walk through the countryside and see things as they are. But I am going to decide what is newsworthy. And I am going to decide how much attention I pay to local, national, international affairs and what is relevant and what's important. And so you can still look at whatever you want to do, but you claim the power in this respect by determining for yourself what you want to look at, what you want to put your energy into, what you want to become conscious of. When you do this, then the construct begins to disintegrate, because it tricks us into thinking that it knows what's important, and it doesn't. It does not know what is important. Only we know that. And so at an individual level, we have to claim that. We have to claim that power for ourselves because no one else will do it for you, and no one else will deliver it to you. You have to do it yourself. So it is a thing of responsibility. It's a thing of spiritual maturity, and it's a thing of conscientiousness. And some people would say it's a very moral or ethical thing to do, and it is in a way. But more importantly, it's a movement of integrity. That's what it is, a movement of integrity. And when we do that within ourselves, it touches everything around us. So everybody we see and speak with and communicate with and love and socialize with and debate with and argue with, all those people feel that integrity, and it changes the dynamic initially at that nodal level and a small level. But of course, the more people who do it, the more that infects the system with this kind of dove virus that decontaminates all this bloody negativity that we see around, because people aren't claiming their power. They're walking around in a powerless state, and when you do that, you gravitate towards doom, and it's stupid, and it's completely unnecessary. So it has to start from where you stand, from your hands in front of your eyes, from when you look at yourself in the mirror each day, from when you walk down the street. That's where it begins, and it all unfolds from that moment, and everybody has the power to do that, but it begins with that claim of your own power, because we all have it. And the only trick of the construct is to con you, is to scam you that you don't have power, and you do. And you have the power not only to determine what you want to do, but fundamentally to determine what you put your consciousness upon. And if that is decided by someone else, then you forfeit that power willfully, and that is what has to change.
On the Sea Realm podcast, a mind that is stretched by a new experience can never go back to its old dimensions.
That was Neil Kramer. In the middle, you heard music from Kirsten Pixton. The song was called Beads on the Wind.